Before the First World War, the subject of my biography was the world's most famous socialist not named Marx or Engels. This was August Bebel, who was born in 1840 and died in 1913. He was the charismatic leader of the largest socialist party in the world. Bebel's funeral in Zurich attracted some 60,000 mourners and lasted for 2 days. He was already hailed as Germany's anti-Kaiser, or workers' emperor. But how did so many workers come to revere a man who began adult life in 1860 as a journeyman turner or machinist, producing doorknobs and window pulls from buffalo horn, but by 1900 exercised unassailable authority within Germany's Social Democratic Party, or SPD. Bebel's party grew to over 1 million members by the First World War and dominated the Second International. In Germany's national elections of 1912, every third voter cast a ballot for the quote-unquote party of revolution, an ominous sign for an authoritarian state preparing for war. Bebel helped the working classes of Germany understand an era of rapid social, political, and cultural change, when reform was in the air and democracy its guiding star. He served as a symbol, a metaphorical hook on which German workers could hang their hopes and their dreams. By contrast, most non-working class Germans believed that Bebel and his followers sought the total overthrow of the existing state and society, as they often put it. For them, he was a German Robespierre, poised to unleash a reign of terror, as in France in the 1790s. Loyalty to the nation became a litmus test of German citizenship. In the words of Emperor Wilhelm II, social democrats were scoundrels without a country. Bebel's life, therefore, illuminates a schism that ran right through the heart of German society and political culture, separating socialists from everyone else. Both the man and the party retained their pariah status from the 1870s to 1913. Yet Bebel's career illustrates how much celebrity and charisma really mattered in the age of mass politics, mass culture, and the mass press. Operating under a Klieg light of unrelenting scrutiny, Bebel became a master at exploiting monarchical, colonial, and other scandals, using them to identify myriad injustices in his world. He saw in socialism the possibility of justice for all, and in patient reform, a nonviolent path toward democracy on a supranational scale. Such issues continue to attract the attention of scholars and the lay public, who know that celebrity has an important role even in such modern social movements as Occupy Wall Street, Me Too, and Black Lives Matter. Bebel provides an addictive fascination that's hard to resist. Yet his biographer has to take a sober approach. Virginia Woolf, in her 1939 essay on the art of biography, put it this way: the biographer must go ahead of the rest of us, like the miner's canary, testing the atmosphere, detecting falsity, unreality, and the presence of obsolete conventions. His sense of truth must be alive and on tiptoe. How then can Bebel's biographer avoid giving him credit for anything within reach? Well, one pitfall is to fold Bebel's career into an Olympian version of social democratic history. Instead, the human and the individual dimension needs to stay front and center. The devil is in the details, but so are the angels. On the one hand, a biographer's job is to find the story they didn't set out to tell. On the other, they should be able to depict a world in which it's difficult to distinguish the missed opportunity from the narrow escape. Incrementalism builds, well, increments. Bold initiatives build real change. Bebel was a meliorist, not a radical. Rosa Luxemburg, on the far left wing of his party, once wrote that she was always trying to get Grandpa out of his corner. After 1890, Bebel arguably engaged in a steady stream of self-delusions, guardrails in a way to keep himself from veering into a pit of self-doubt. Was Bebel's characteristic caution mainly prudent or excessive? Does it seem almost craven? Well, judged against an ideal, Bebel fell short. Judged against the world as it was, he shone. In fact, taking on too much was the way Bebel lived his life, in two respects. He worked his way to a timely death at the advanced age of 73, something quite remarkable from lowly working class origins. And he challenged the central pillars, the defining frames of Germany's pre-war epoch, its authoritarian state and its bourgeois society. Was Bebel's status as an idol, as an anti-Kaiser, hard on him? Without doubt, because he knew better. Less would have been more. Even though Bebel was not principally a political writer, we can give him credit for facing up to what Timothy Garton Ash recently identified as the age-old trilemma facing such writers. One, how to stand with the oppressed. Two, continue to speak the truth. Yet three, not give comfort to the enemy. Bebel's charity toward the working man saved many of his speeches and writings from being mere noble pamphleteering. He lived serially through the same states of mind of other men of his class. He was, in the final analysis, reassuring, not Panglossian. As Richard Reichard once wrote, he had that, quote, perceptiveness of what his followers feel today without their being able to articulate, but will insist upon tomorrow. The shimmering image of a future state, a Zukunftsstaat, allowed Bebel to provide emotional pastoral care to his followers, even as the medium of celebrity ensorcelled them. In some ways, Bebel's political and public persona was not unlike that of Britain's King George V in the early 1930s, distant and magical, yet intimate and paternal. To understand the appeal of the Zukunftsstaat to German workers, one has to understand the style in which it was imagined. We can read in countless autobiographies how working class men and women, as they became politically aware and sentient, attended a Bebel rally or opened his most famous work, Woman and Socialism, written in 1879 for the first time. They felt an all-encompassing moment of shared camaraderie. Hearing a Bebel speech made the light in their head brighten by a few lumens. Suddenly they became contemporaries, branded with memories that would last as long as life itself. They could follow the socialist pillar of fire without getting lost in the wilderness. It's the rare working class autobiography that does not include Bebel and this revelation experience. Bebel's speeches in the Reichstag evolved from the early days, where he encountered catcalls and sardonic laughter and balled fists from the opposing benches, to later ones where he foghorned the abuse of military recruits and the murder of indigenous peoples. Bebel understood the subtle rift between truth and information. Truth complicates, information simplifies. Bebel knew how to deploy both in his speeches, characteristically bolstered by a mountain of facts. He blew the oxygen of reported truth into the fog of official lies. The essayist Adam Gopnik caught this point when he observed what made Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin great. He wrote, they knew how to inspire, but they knew how to argue first. They particularized in everything, and their big ideas arose from small sightings. They hoped that people's minds and hearts could be altered by the slow crawl of fact as much as by the long reach of revelation. Well, I think this sums up Bebel's parliamentary approach very nicely. However, Lincoln believed that procedural democracy was the right way to fix slavery. Things get better by following the rules. That was a lesson that didn't serve Bebel well. How many accounts of Bebel's life have been too generous, too gracious? The longer I study him, the more I see his flaws and failures, not as ephemeral, but not wiped from the ledger because he faced allegedly insurmountable challenges. We mustn't take at face value Bebel's self-effacing claims, for instance, that he never rose above the level of a mediocre craftsman, showed little musical aptitude, or couldn't hold his liquor. More seriously, Bebel professed his horror of personality cults and conceded that he struggled in his personal life to reconcile his duties at work, in politics, and as a father. How much, I ask myself, how much of this is a defensive crouch, a bid to put oneself down before posterity can? It's normal now to preface any praise of a public figure with the word flawed, but using this term feels somehow like an ungracious hedge, a churlish reluctance to commend the powerful or famous, no matter how deserving they might be. These days, we tend to give the benefit of the doubt to those public figures whose moral stance we like and whose devotion to duty impresses us. We cut them some slack, or we don't. In my biography, I'm trying not so much to puncture the Bebel myth as to let out just enough air to settle the man back down to earth. To what degree did Bebel widen or narrow the social, political, and cultural divides that separated his party from the rest of Germany? Bebel was a mass of contradictions, a popular firebrand and a parliamentary pragmatist, a late to the party Marxist and the harbinger of worldwide revolution, a doctrinal touchstone and a political chameleon. Bebel resisted efforts to put him in a political straitjacket. He was usually found right up the middle, a second baseman with range. And yet, did he provide a script for how to manipulate crises to one's political advantage? Did he believe that politics, like nature, is red in tooth and claw? There's evidence in his private papers that he did, but I think the jury is still out on that point. The same question can be posed in other ways, of which I'll mention just two in my final comments, relating to the age of Bebel and to what followed. First, a new Bebel biography will have to be a Russian nesting doll of a book where every character's hand fits into someone else's pocket. This presents a narrative challenge of daunting proportions. Somehow the biographer has to whittle his surrounding cast down to size. But how can one avoid introducing the reader to such outsized figures as Liebknecht Peer and Julia née Otto, to Bismarck and Puttkamer, to Marx and Engels, to Bernstein and Kautsky, to Luxemburg and Liebknecht Fils, and so on and so forth? Second, what were the career-defining lessons that Bebel and his closest colleagues learned from their strategic errors? What course corrections did they make for the future? Mark Twain once said, "There's no education in the second kick of a mule." Did Bebel shape the future leadership of Philipp Scheidemann, or did a rejection of his style shape the career of Friedrich Ebert? Did distrust of charismatic leadership color the outlook of the grand old men of the Social Democratic Party in the last years of the Weimar Republic, perhaps because the Bismarck and Hitler cults were so potent? In this context, the year of Bebel's death, 1913, is nothing more than one among a number of data points. Lewis Carroll once remarked, "It's a poor sort of memory that only works backward." I'm not a fan of what-if history, quite the opposite. But from time to time, I find myself ruminating on the question of what I would like Bebel and his party to have done to bend the arc of the moral universe more quickly toward justice. What could have been done differently to avoid the carnage of the Great War? Make fewer compromises with the established order? Launch a mass strike or a revolution? Assassinate the Kaiser, lay down arms instead of marching to the front in August 1914? But now I've sinned against the historian's creed of talking about an unknowable future. A second offense and I'll be demoted to the status of a weatherman. So I'll simply ask forgiveness and end here.